So yeah, I probably should have thought about what I was going to say. So yeah, I was born in Australia and I spent most of my life in Australia and also New Zealand, and both countries have like fantastic like indigenous cultures, and my observation is that in Australia we are like not good towards the indigenous people, and we also like don't care about indigenous culture, and we like, you know, like at school we don't learn anything about indigenous culture, and that's a real shame, I think, because the Australian indigenous culture is like so rich and they have so much that we could learn from. And so yeah, in comparison, then I grew up in New Zealand, I went to school in New Zealand, and the indigenous culture there is like really respected. And I think the reason for this is because when the white people, the settlers came, they didn't actually like take over the country. They ended up having a treaty with the indigenous people. It's called the Treaty of Waitangi. So they agreed to share the land together. And I think because of that reason, there's kind of like more this respect for each other. And so yeah, at school we learned all about like Māori culture, we learned like Māori songs, we even learned like the Māori language, and so for me I think there's a little bit like more respect for the indigenous culture and therefore like less racism. For me personally in Australia growing up, I didn't encounter like a lot of racism. I think the worst kind of thing I encountered was like this boy who liked me and I didn't like him back, and then like as an insult he said to me like, oh, you like effing like abo, and like that was like the worst thing he could think of to say to me. And I thought, oh, like I could kind of like, it didn't affect me a lot because I understood it was coming from a place of like he was feeling rejected, but at the same time I thought that it's kind of sad that like that was the biggest insult he could think of, was to call me like an indigenous person, an abo. And yeah, like I think for me the main way I've experienced racism is just, yeah, when I was younger and like I'd go into shops and look around at shops, I always noticed the shop people would always look extra at me, and like for like a long time I didn't really understand why, and I thought like maybe they like my pants, maybe they think I've got a nice face, they want to look at my face longer, but I really like deep down, if I really thought about it, I knew it was because I was like darker, and like either they thought I was like, yeah, Middle Eastern or Indian or an Aboriginal. So yeah, I definitely like felt, for me, like actually shopping has never really, I've never liked shopping, and I think it's actually because of that reason I always felt like I was being watched more.
I definitely think that it exists. Anyone who says that it doesn't exist, I'm not sure what world they're living in. I think the thing about Australia is that we're one of the few, but increasingly more countries dealing with people of diverse backgrounds in sort of all aspects of society, I guess. I personally am fortunate enough to not have experienced any violence or overt discrimination because of who I am, where I come from, where I was born. But I know that's not the case for many people, and that I guess the time that my family came to Australia was sort of like a different time to now, with issues of immigration and things like that. But I definitely, just growing up, the way that the language used in schools, you know, just the way that you talk about, I guess because I should probably put to context, I'm from a migrant family. I was born in Indonesia, in Jakarta. My parents are both of Chinese Indonesian heritage. yeah, so I guess a lot of the language that kids use in schools, in my particular case, used about Asian people, became normalized for me, because that was my understanding of like, oh, okay, this is what it is now. Because at such a young age you don't, well, in general, I didn't know what was racist and what was people joking and what, you know, the difference between that, because there's often like a grey line between good intentions and, you know, misaligned ones. So just things like people commenting on the darkness of my skin, the colour of my hair, my eyes, even just saying things like, oh, you have really big eyes for an Asian person. You know, just that stereotype that people who aren't Asian, or even people who are, want to categorize you, and they want to put you in a box and like, okay, this is where you fit. And then sometimes you just don't fit. And I think that's what my understanding or my feeling that I get when sometimes I interact with just new people I meet. They look at me and they're like, okay, she's Asian, but she speaks really good English. She's got really big eyes, but she speaks like an Australian. She doesn't look like an Australian. You know what I mean? And you know, just going overseas, some people have an understanding of Australia's history and our population, and other people don't. Some people think we're all just blue-eyed blonde hair beachgoers, which is really not the case. So when they meet me, they sort of are a little bit like, oh, you're Australian? I was like, yeah, I'm Australian. Inside, maybe not on the outside, whatever that means. So yeah, it's definitely something that's always in the back of your head when you're not a white Australian. Like when you're going into a workplace, when I started a new workplace, I just became aware of how there was a lack of diversity in terms of, you know, people of colour, and there's almost this like responsibility that like, okay, I've got to like prove myself. But I imagine that's not something with people of maybe Caucasian background would think when they start. And you know, for example, I'm talking to someone who's never experienced racism, and they're like, oh, they don't understand like what that could be or what that means. And I think it's really important to have those conversations about it's real, it's a thing, and it's not always obvious, and that's the hard part, is that it's not obvious and it's uncomfortable when people talk about it, and yeah, all of that. Like I mentioned earlier, I think just teaching, or I guess giving people the tools to be able to talk about it without feeling uncomfortable or without making the other person feel attacked. I think empathy is a good starting point for a solution.
And I remember being on a plane back to Fiji. I was going to visit family, and I was sitting next to a white couple, and they were trying to assess whether I was the good type of immigrant, and then they were making that distinction between, you know, there's people that come here just to cause trouble and they're not the types we want here, but you know, you're alright because you live the Australian type of way and that sort of stuff. So it's more that sort of measuring you against their standard, rather than you've come to Australia, you've been raised in Australia, educated in Australia, you're Australian. So there was always that level of disconnect. I didn't really feel like it, and yeah, it started in high school and yeah, continued since. And I guess I don't really get the more in-your-face types now. And that might be because I'm a man and there's always like a gender dynamic to it as well. But yeah, it was, at that point I didn't really consider it harmful. It was just the school environment. And because it was an all-boys school, that type of teasing or that type of way of communicating and interacting with each other just kind of seemed normal, and you had to just tough it out because you didn't want to seem like it was getting to you, or that you were hurting, or it was making you feel bad or anything like that. You just had to be a man and you had to suck it up, and it doesn't matter if they were talking all kinds of crap about, you know, where you came from and who you are. You just had to tough it out. And it's only now that I've gotten older and I can think back on those times that I can say yeah, that was racism. They might not have been really trying to hurt me, but it was still racism. And I guess that, and a lot of that just came from ignorance. But yeah, and that's absolutely something we have to be aware of as well. What's our part in anti-black racism? What are we doing to uphold racism as well? But very much communication, having those dialogues, and being open to the learning process and the feeling of being uncomfortable. That is really what can drive change and can drive growth. And then as far as like systems of power, we need better representation in our leadership. We need better representation in media. We need better representation in those positions of power. Because until we have that, and until we have meaningful community dialogue, it's going to be a losing battle, I think. Because it's very easy for those people in those positions of power to disregard how the community reacts to something, or how the community perceives something, how they feel about something. But I think, in that respect, then it really is on people who come from positions of privilege, who are white and who do have that power to be heard and say things that are gonna capture attention, to put the spotlight on the voices that are otherwise muted or silenced, and to say, hey, you're ignoring this community's feelings about this, or their thoughts about this, or what you're saying is harmful about this, and we're not going to stand for it. We're standing with them, and we're going to stand against what you're saying. And that's about really engaging with the political sphere that you're in, and doing what you can to resist those systems of power in whatever way you can. Whether that's calling your ministers, writing emails, letters, showing up to protests, signing petitions, and even just how you vote. So yeah, I think it's it's a complicated issue, and that means that the solutions or any sort of strategies, they're going to be complex as well.
Sure.
And it definitely is a process. But yeah.
But where I live in Northern Beaches, there's not a lot of diversity, and so people will kind of just stop and stare, and they're driving their cars and they're looking over at me, and I'm like, you're gonna crash if you don't look at the road. I was going into this acting agency because I really wanted to do acting, and this woman said, oh, you probably won't get the lead roles because you're not white. And that's just paraphrasing, but she went on for a bit longer about how, the white girls and the skinnier girls, the model looking ones, are gonna be the lead roles, and I might just be an extra. So that's always fun to hear. Yeah, I think racism is very prominent in Australia, and I think it's funny because there's so much diversity in, for example, Western Sydney, and yet there's still so much racism that goes on in that area. I think in terms of trying to solve an issue, I think a lot of for me, a lot of this sort of stuff comes from ignorance. A lot of people just don't know. And I think if people were to sit down and listen and to understand a different culture, I think they'd really enjoy it. So I think if people can take the time out to understand and to experience another culture, then I think this world might be a better place.
I would say the first side would be to take care of it when an incident occurs. When a racist incident occurs, it's very important to address that there and then. One would be for the victim. It would be good to teach the victim sort of how to react, or how to where to go, for example, if they felt discriminated in any way. And I think it's important for everybody to know that they're fully protected by the law, and really none of these events should happen. And also, I think on one end of the spectrum, sort of dealing with racism after it has happened is great and it helps. But at the same time, that usually treats the like the symptom of the disease, whereas the cause of it might be something that could also be addressed. It might just be based on fear. It might be based on issues that aren't being tackled, maybe by the local government. So that's I think there's two sides to dealing with the problem, and I do think they would take a while, but I think they work. I think they work.
I think, all racism comes from fear, and we don't understand about other cultures, and we think that they're like different, like there's something different and we're different, but we're all human beings and we're all like the same race, we're all the human race. And I think if the more we can, through art and music and like even YouTube and content, if we can show how similar we all are, that will help to bring the barriers of fear down, and then hopefully racism as well.